Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we're brought to you by some great sponsors: Cryptech, Blokes Modern Men's Health, Mountain Tough Fitness, and Trapline Beard Oil. Do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review if you like this program on whatever platform you're tuning in from, and use those promo codes in the show notes for some great discounts on wonderful brands. Now, today's guest is an icon in the Idaho trapping world. He's the president of both the Idaho Trappers Association and newly crowned president of the National Trappers Association. He also happens to be one of the first men in Idaho to trap a wolf after their reintroduction. Rusty Kramer, welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to have me. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been excited to chat with you for a long time. I know we've had our own conversations outside at some of the ITA events, but the first question that always gets asked by everybody, or to everybody rather, is if you can reach back in the recesses of your brain, what's the first time you ever remember being exposed to trapping?
I would think it would be back when I was, 7, 8 years old and trapping muskrats with my dad. There's a little reservoir. We're desert country where I'm at, but there's still some reservoirs and little creeks and trapping muskrats with my dad.
And so was trapping always then just a family thing for you? Clearly your dad trapped, but what was it that it took you to be like 7 or 8 years old before you really got down there and got to trapping muskrats?
Well, I tell a lot of people this. I don't fish and I don't bird hunt because my dad doesn't. And so, my first actual trapping myself was trapping muskrats and mink. But, when I was just old enough, there's pictures of me just as a toddler riding around the pickup with my dad, and how I learned to land trap was just years of just looking over my dad's shoulder. And he's like, you want to start setting some coyote traps yourself? And my style just was learned by just watching my dad. So I think we're all a product. Well, I hope maybe not in today's world where a lot of kids grow up without a father, but I was blessed to grow up around that my entire life. And I still, up until we'll see if he's going to make it this year, I still trap with my dad every year.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I mean, I hope it is, and I hope you get next year too, and I hope you get the year after, but I understand those get harder and harder as our parents age. I did not grow up in a hunting or a trapping family. I grew up in a great family. I got exposed to a lot of things through my dad, but trapping and hunting was not one of those. But did your dad trap for sustenance, or was it a hobby for him?
It was definitely, that was I know there in the late 70s and early 80s, he still tells me about a $1,200 check that came in. He still remembers the exact amount, and they came out right. The fur buyer came right to his house, and right before Christmas, and he had never seen that much money at once before. And it was definitely a supplement to them during that time because they were farmers. And so then he had time to trap in the fall, and they actually raised fox for 35 years as well. And so, yes, it's definitely something in his blood. Otherwise, a person in failing health and all the money he could ever want is still going out and trapping flesh and $20 coyotes. So he clearly loves it now, but at a time when he was first starting out, it was definitely supplemented the income in the family.
Yeah, that time period of the late 70s, early 80s is one that gets brought up often on this show, from people who were either young when that was going on and their parents were trapping, or they were a part of it themselves, where some people were buying new trucks during that fur boom just based off their, regular trapping exercises. Were able to actually make a really good living. It goes to a question that I wanted to ask. I'm going to skip forward a little bit though, but if you had your crystal ball, like, do you think we're ever going to get back to that type of, income just from trapping like you were, or like you saw in the late 70s and early 80s?
I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be different, with the F4WM reimbursements, that helps slightly. Like I had 2 wolves last year that they F4WM paid me $2,000 a piece, and I sold both of those taxidermy style. So made a little bit of income on those. But there's people that are making their own stuff. There is definitely a lot of people now with this nest raider craze in the Southeast that are literally, working for someone trying to manage predators and getting paid a salary for it. So it does look a little different. And I think it's just, like everything we say, you got to have to adapt or die. And so people are having to adjust their thing, look for different markets for their fur, skull markets and things like that, or getting paid for somebody to trap.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the target just moves and you got to adjust. And, if you want to make money at it, I think there's opportunity too. It's just a bit being creative. But before getting there in deeper conversation, I do want to kind of go back to your childhood too. So you were trapping muskrats. Do you remember kind of like that first interaction you had when you walked up to a critter in a trap, whether that was a conibear, a foothold? I don't know what you were using at the time, but was it something that kind of grabbed you at that moment when you did get your first critter, or was it something that took a long time to get its talons in you?
Yeah, I will say yes and no, because I can remember as a kid, it was always super exciting going to checking traps and remembering the first beaver that I held in a muskrat set was just like, and there's a picture of me posing with this little 10-pound beaver that I caught, and the first mink I caught, and the first coon I caught, and those were very embedded in my memory. And when I was in and like most young teenage boys, all of a sudden when you became a teenager and like sports and girls start taking over your life and you not having a lot of spare time, where short daylight hours in the winter, and all of a sudden you're out of basketball practice and it's dark and you're like, okay, how can I trap right now? And so taking a little bit of a hiatus my teenage years, but quickly when I got right after got out of high school and got a real job, started really getting back into it and really getting interested and really dedicating a lot of time to it.
And when that happened, so I think the cool thing is, I think for most men, like you said, those teenage years, like whether you're a trapper or not, I think everybody takes a hiatus and focuses on girls and sports, or a lot of people do, myself included. So we all missed out on those years, no matter what we were focused on. But when you got back into it after you had graduated, you had an adult job at the time. What was it, back to muskrats, or like what was it that you started to target when you were getting a little more serious into your early adult phase?
So I know you have viewers all over, but we have a computer. A lot of people don't realize I was actually worked at a computer chip factory for 10 years, right out of high school. And so worked way up to management there. And it was shift work. And so we were working 12s. And so it was a 4-day work week and a 3-day work week. And so I would save all my vacation time up. And with a 4-day through 4 or 3-day work week, you don't have to save up. All of a sudden I could take, 12 days off and I could have 25 straight days off. And so that was in the early 2000s. Coyotes were marketable, and we've found some other markets for them. And so I would save up all my vacation time, and I would there in early October, and I would take 25 days, and I would go with my dad, and we would land trap as hard as we could for that time. And my dad was doing other stuff, and I'm like, hey, I've only got 20 however many days off. We are going balls to walls here, and we are going hard right now. And I look back, and my dad was probably like, geez, I didn't really want to go that hard, but it was daylight till dark. We had 3 trap lines, and we were going heavy. That was, believe it or not, that was one of I had probably had more traps set during that time period than I ever have. Now I've got other stuff going on, but I still try and dedicate quite a few traps in the ground. But I was going really, really hard there in the early 2000s.
And with that too, I think, I'm an adult onset trapper, and, with the wolf trapping, coyote trapping, I think your approach was right. As I've learned more and more, like, you really need a lot of time to have steel on the ground. Like where I'm at now with 3 young kids, like my trapping the last year looks a lot different than the years prior, where I could get 30 days, 40 days strung together to really be out and trap hard. Now it's a 3-day weekend here, a 3-day weekend there, and it just doesn't seem to work out the same way. So was that your intention to just make sure you had that many consecutive days, or was that just a product of the PTO you were able to accrue and leverage?
Yeah, that was a probably a little of both. And where I'm at, I'm not actually that far geographically. I'm not quite of high elevation as you are, but we get deep snow, and where I trap is kind of straight across in the high country. It's kind of straight across from where you live.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're on borrowed time up there. It's always on borrowed time. And so we would go to the high country when it's early, and we would just go as hard as we could. And then when we getting snowed out, we were like the sheep. We started filtering down to the lower country, and I was blessed with a lot of private ground accessibility and, hundreds of thousands of acres of public ground around me as well.
And in those, first few years in the early 2000s where you kind of re-picked it up after having taken a little bit of a hiatus, a question I always like to ask, especially since many of the people listening to this podcast are either people who are interested in trapping or are relatively new to trapping. Do you remember like what your biggest mistake was when you first started to do what I'll call like long line trapping?
Yeah, definitely. My dad is big on kind of letting you learn your own mistakes. And so looking back, if he had said, "Hey, you're being an idiot right here," but he kind of let me do trip and fall myself. And so with coyotes, they are the most persecuted animal on the planet, and so they are just like nervous all the time. And so I was, even though I'd read books, and we still didn't have the stuff online, they didn't have the internet then, but I was putting too much backing on, or I was nestled up too much to a tree. And so my dad finally, he's like, "Hey, we'll get out of the pickup. You pick out whatever lure you want and you put it in your bag. I don't care. You want to go left, you want to go right, and I'll go the other direction." He gave me the best of both worlds, whatever I wanted, but it quickly became, I'm like, why is he catching more than I am? And so he's just like, "You've got to just, what am I doing different?" And I really started going from there and going to a smaller backing. And I've still kind of looked back at that on, my dad really asking me to watch what's working and then read the animals. Not to go off into the weeds, but it was right then that we had a very long, I bobcat trap, just a little different than a lot of people, but we bury our traps, and we have, I do walkthroughs, but we use wax dirt.
Mm-hmm.
Big showy walkthroughs. Our bobcats, you got to get south into the rocks and cliff country. But anyways, we'd had this line for 3 weeks and caught no coyotes, 0 coyotes, couple cats, and wasn't really targeting the coyotes because they were starting to rub by then anyways. But anyways, seeing a skiff in the snow, an inch in the snow, coyotes coming up the sets, and they could smell my lure, but they would not go through that big showy walkthrough with all the rocks piled up and a big, huge walkthrough. And then we got 8 inches of snow one time, and we had 7 coyotes on our line. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Oh man, okay." And I'm just pulling coyotes out of the traps and skipping on. And my dad's like, "Hey, why don't you slow down for a second and think, why do we have 7 coyotes now and we haven't had any in 3 weeks?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. All that snow had leveled everything out. And so those bobcats will walk right through there. But those coyotes then, once it was leveled out, kind of like it snows on the toys in your yard or the garden hose, and then the light bulb started going off." And he's like, "You need to always, I know we're bobcat trapping now, but how does a coyote react to your cat set? You always got to be watching and learning." And so just the light bulb started going off on always be watching, be trying to learn. And it'll be the summertime, and I'm checking water from my water job, and "Hey, how did that otter pull out of the creek?" And always looking. And if you're a true trapper, you're thinking trapping all the time.
Yeah, I think, well, that's great advice. And it's one that I'm trying to get better at heeding, which is learning from your mistakes. Because, I think for me, I've had this personally, as a relatively new trapper, I'm 7 years in, I always have that excuse that I'm a new trapper when I have a mistake or something doesn't go my way. But I'm also trying to be focused on learning. And I don't always do the best because I sometimes make the same mistake more than once. But I think that's great advice to either whether you write it down or whether you just committed to memory to think about why you had success, especially when conditions change.
Yeah, and just continue to learn from the animals. You're like, oh, they're reacting this way. And that's why a skift of snow can really either humble you or it can really get the light bulbs off. And if the ground's rock hard, you're like, well, I don't know how they reacted here, but seeing how they come up and when I'd miss something with a skift of snow and you'd be going up just starting to cuss, and my dad's like, whoa, just take a second, stand 5 feet back, and how did he come up to your set? And maybe sit here and learn a little bit from the animals. And that's the biggest thing. I think young trappers are just kind of, hey, this is not just 2 + 2 is 4. It's an art to this thing, and that's what's the toughest thing to teach, I think, the beginners to the sport.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And it's one of those things, like I struggle when people ask me how to get into trapping. And there's tons of great resources now. Like there are so many great, whether it be YouTube channels or even books, things like that do a great job of kind of going through the mechanics of trapping. But it is a boots on the ground, time spent trying to feel out that art and failing that I think makes a good trapper these days.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Super hard. And you just got to accrue it. So, you go through that, you're going through all this coyote trapping. I want to touch on, the history of wolves in our state. So for those listening, most people know I'm from Idaho. Rusty, you're from Idaho. Like before kind of going into like the first bit of wolf trapping in Idaho, like when it opened, could you give a little bit of a history on like just the reintroduction of wolves? Like for those who don't know, a little bit about how and why it happened and what the carrying capacity was meant to be. And then versus obviously what it's ballooned to now. And then obviously your involvement as it's gone into, helping support a healthy wolf trapping area in Idaho.
Yeah. No, be glad to. It's funny. Just yesterday we had a long meeting. I was on a board call with Wisconsin Trappers Association discussing wolf issues, and they're like in the infancy stages of, and I knew that I remember the growing pains, but they reintroduced the wolves in the mid 90s in a couple different locations besides Yellowstone. It's still up for discussion. There was a couple other places because I'd heard some just north of Fairfield. I don't ever go down the road of whether it was the right wolf or the wrong wolf, because really we're 35 years past that, so it doesn't really matter. We need to talk about right now. One thing that you can't dispute is it was a massive success story, whatever side of the fence you're on, because when they put them in, they were expecting them just to stay in a couple locations up in Salmon and Yellowstone. And in a short amount of time, they are just like a tumbleweed. They just go, and it just explodes out. I mean, even grizzly bears are massively overpopulated, but they just incrementally spread out, where wolves will just, especially those 2-year-olds that are kicked out of a pack, will just go. But it was in the mid 90s, and it was already in the year 2000 that I was already catching them in coyote sets. And right then we were still worried about, oh my God, is this a $100,000 fine? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so we just turned them loose, and then all of a sudden
real quick before you go on from there, but like that late 90s, early 2000s, a few years after the reintroduction, or even at that 1994 reintroduction, like how privy were you to this all going on around you? Like, were you very well aware about the reintroduction, or was it just one of those things like where come 99, 2000, you're checking a coyote set and you've got like, oh shit, this is a really big coyote, obviously knowing it's a wolf. Like, what was the time? What was it like around that time? Like, was it very well known or not?
Well, I know I look a lot older than that, but actually I was just graduating high school in 96.
Okay.
So again, in 95, 96, I wasn't very aware. There's some kids now that are very politically involved. I was not. I was a little bit into the Trappers Association and events, had a National Trappers Association membership, but wasn't deeply involved. And when I was working in that computer chip factory, everybody was talking about the reintroduction of wolves and mostly hunters, obviously, but just realizing how divisive it was. And I was like, holy cow. And so I wasn't really involved in it. And then when we started trapping in my areas there, we had heard some people seeing some wolves, and we're like, oh, we'll never catch one, or they just saw a big coyote. And because it was up until I think like 10 years ago that I'd actually seen the first wolf I'd ever seen that wasn't standing in a trap. So it wasn't like I was ever seeing them. And so then, yeah, we did hear that there was some wolves up there, and we just trapped like we normally did. And to walk up there on that first wolf and yell back at my dad over the hill, and I'm like, holy cow, I got a wolf. And he's like, whatever. And we had a wolf pup sitting there in the trap. And that's still to this day, it's the only time that I ever had a double. In the background of one of the pictures is a coyote sitting in a picture. And it's one of the only ones that's ever howled in a trap. And to see that coyote's reaction when it was howling was kind of interesting. But I've still never caught a coyote and wolf double since that very first one I caught.
Well, that's amazing. And like you said, that first one, though, you were worried about like fines and penalties because they were at the time, right? It was still very much a protected class in Idaho, right?
Very, very much. I now that I know a little more about it, was under the ESA, but they were under Rule J, so it was an experimental. So it wasn't quite the same as if a person catches a Canadian lynx right now. But we had no idea. We literally just turned the first two loose from a trap and never said anything. And on our trapper report, we put it on the trapper's report, but it never got a call or anything. We're like, I guess we're not going to jail. I mean, we just tried to follow all the rules that we could. And then we found out from our friends at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they're like, we need collars on wolves. And so literally the next 11 that I caught, we called the feds. They put a collar on it and took the DNA and did all that stuff. And so I had 11 wolves that I'd caught in traps that had collars on them, the next 11.
And those were those all in like bycatches from your coyote sets, or were you actually targeting them for collars at the time?
No. We were just coyote trapping. This was all, most of those were well before we had a trapping season. And the last couple, we had a trapping season, but not open in southern Idaho yet.
But 11 catches over a number of years in your coyote. I mean, that just goes to show, like you said, the success story of how well these wolves repopulate, grow, and spread. Because how do you remember what the actual initial introduction numbers were? Like, it was pretty low, right?
Yeah, it was only, I believe the number was 26 was the number. They introduced 26, and yeah, for in 30 years to say that there's zero suitable habitat in all of Idaho, and the population's grown to 1,500, and then everybody forgets all of California, Oregon, and Washington wolves all came from Idaho. Those all just migrated from Idaho. So if you really wanted to call that Idaho's population, original population, all of those came from Idaho's population as well. So it is amazing to me, and they can take a heavy harvest, and they are a dog, so they breed and repopulate very quickly, and they can take heavy. It's not like an otter or a bobcat or a marten that you have to be very, very careful about harvest rates. And that's why the wolf reintroduction and the wolf management started incrementally, just in the panhandle, and started going down and down. And then all of a sudden, just a short hunting season, and then they realized they weren't harvesting what they want to a year-round hunting season and a 6-month trapping season, and still not getting the harvest that the state is looking for, just tells you how hard they are to pursue and how much they can repopulate.
Well, that leads me to 2 questions. One, the 11 bycatches you had in your coyote traps, like, what do you attribute that to? Like, were you starting to pick up on some of the wolf behavior, or was this just like a byproduct of non-trap shy wolves kind of getting hung up? Because my experience so far, having started in like 2021, 2020, like, they're so dang hard and they're so trap shy. Like, what do you attribute that to out of that very beginning part of your, we'll call it your wolf trapping career, whether it was accidental or not?
We didn't know it at the time, but it's just like real estate. Everything's about location. And those travelways are still producing wolves to this day. And I don't know how they pass that down generation to generation. There's some drainages, like it will say where I trap, every draw, every drainage, everything has got coyote and fox traps up them. And there's some of them that have never caught a wolf in 25 years. And there's some of them that I guarantee a wolf's going to walk down. It might just be 45 days until they do. Now, that being said, I've got a couple honey holes, but I'm always looking for more places, because it's just trying to find their travel ways, because wolves are habitual on the travel ways. And then it's just keeping your traps working and then being patient enough with the mental toughness that it's 40 days till they come back by sometimes.
God, and that's just the hardest thing in Idaho, is keeping your traps working for 45 plus days, because you get a foot of snow, you get freezing rain. And I've had it where perfect travel way and foot of snow comes and trap rendered useless, wolf step right on top of it, no problem. And that's the most frustrating experience that I've ever had in my life. But one that I think every trapper experiences. So at what point, like when you're starting to work with the feds some to collar wolves, I'm sure you're having these conversations. You're probably getting a little more involved with like Idaho Trappers Association. Like, at what point or what year do you remember there being like a collective, like, like you said, the harvest rates aren't enough to kind of keep that carrying capacity low. What was that conversation, and when was it in Idaho where they're like, we need to do something about this, whether that's expanding the trapping seasons, making it easier to get your wolf tags for hunters?
I would say like it was right when I became president, like a year later, that we really tried to ramp up opening some seasons. And so Justin Webb, the executive director for Foundation for Wildlife Management, I encourage you to try and get him on sometime.
He's been on. We've had him on.
Okay. He came up to one of our conventions. We had a convention in Fairfield, and he literally just came up and just pulled up, and I walked out, and because he doesn't look like a trapper by any means. And I was like, "Are you lost?" And he goes, "No, I'm just here to meet you and learn about the Idaho Trappers Association and see how we can start working together." And that next fall, I ran for president, and I asked him to be on my board. And the next year, I jumped onto I was elected onto the Foundation for Wildlife Management board. And ever since then, we worked together as groups on proposing units. And it was just incremental with the department on, okay, let's get the rest of these units open. Let's go with a little earlier season. Let's open up bag limits. And so every year we would try and get a little more. And they were very hesitant because they don't want the feds taking over control of them by any means. And so they were worried that the population would suffer. And so we just incrementally until I would say 2021 or so, 2020, we had the most liberal hunting and trapping seasons in the world. Even the only one that was more was the Wyoming predator zone, which has very few wolves and is mostly antelope in desert country. We had the most liberal wolf harvest in the United States, more than Alaska, more than Montana. And we attribute that to just working together and coming with one voice to the department.
Yeah, and it worked, right? I think that's been the most exciting thing. But you're very close to all the stats and everything. But even with that very liberal hunting and trapping season, like you know my area, like I'm probably the only guy out there really pushing wolf trapping, and I'm not coming up with tons every year. Like even with that, like we're still falling behind. So like how do we go forward with that? Like how do you start to really taper the growth in, like, I see it in our ungulate population year over year. Like I was out, I had an early season velvet buck tag and I got to go fill it up near me, which was great. But the drainage I was in was one that I wolf trap, and man, there's just sign everywhere, and there's just fewer and fewer ungulates every year.
Yeah, I mean it is a very, it's not black and white. This whole ungulate thing is very convoluted. I was just talking to a fishing game commissioner today about something different, and I'm like, this is not black and white, because literally in some units, take unit 44 right where I'm at, the top end of it, there's not a big bull to be found, and heck, there was a whole bunch of leftover tags, and you get at the bottom end, and they're literally having to issue all these cow depredation tags in August because they're packed down into the pivots. And it's the same unit. So some of it can be misleading, where a lot of these elk have really moved and changed their habits and stuff. But it's a very complicated issue where we've got so much of Idaho that's very rugged. If you didn't have F4WM, I think there'd be very few people even trapping them, because it keeps you out in the woods still pursuing them. I think once the novelty wore off and you got a couple, if you weren't really trying to pursue them to help ungulate, if you were just trying to pay bills for your family, I'd still pursue $20 coyotes. They'd be better for me than $1,000 wolves. And so they just are very far roaming. 0.5% are harvested with a gun. And that's with almost every elk and deer hunter having a tag in their pocket. And like I said, I've only seen a couple wolves in my life just out there. And there's people that have hunted them. There's some hardcore guys, and they're in a little higher populations, but they're very hard to hunt. And then the trapping is just, I wouldn't say they are wary, but it's the big travel routes that are tough. And now with this current grizzly lawsuit, it's taken 80% of our wolf units and reduced the season by 50%. And so now if you can't start till December 1st, some of these guys are already starting with 3 feet of snow on the ground when the season starts. And so there's just a lot and they can rebound very quickly. And if you're bordering up there in the Panhandle, they can harvest as much as they want, and they're just kind of filtering back in from Washington. Or our big central Idaho's got all that wilderness that very few wolves are harvested. They're all just kind of spilling out of there like ants out of the top of an anthill, and we're kind of just, it's just always continuing to spill out. So it's going to be a long scale it's not going to be just a one-time deal. They're just going to get long-term wolf management, they're going to have to stay at it long-term.
Yeah. And I think that's where you said the incentives, thankfully there's the F4WM and, the state to kind of giving enough incentives for folks to hopefully get out there and try their hand at it, and to kind of maybe contain it to some degree, but it's hard. And, I had a question for you too, as you brought up the grizzly lawsuit. It might be worth for listeners who don't know to give like a brief history of that. But like, I remember, I think it was last year when it kind of first hit us, but it was the year prior where the same grizzly suit happened in Montana. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's not going to happen here. I like distinctly remember watching it happen in Montana and thinking, nope, not going to happen here. And then sure as shit, the next year we have the same problem. Thankfully, my unit was unaffected. However, it kind of blew my mind. So maybe if you don't mind giving a brief on just what that was between Montana and Idaho, and then the follow-on question would be, how do we prevent something like that starting to affect in the opposite direction our wolf seasons?
Yeah, in 2013, we had a lynx lawsuit that was mirrored very similar to this, that states the Endangered Species Act, the ESA, it has very clear definitions of you cannot molest, harm, kill, take, and that's a key word, take a endangered species. So it doesn't matter if it's released unharmed or not. If you take a lynx and run it up a tree with a hound, or it goes into a cage trap, that is still a take with Endangered Species Act. And so, and they're literally, if you look down at the how close it is, if you're impeding his line of traffic, we're even saying that these guys in Yellowstone that are the grizzlies turning and looking at the 30 people taking pictures of them, you are technically harassing, you're taking that animal. And so what the lawsuit essentially said in 2013, the lynx lawsuit said, since a couple lynx had been caught in the past, that they were going to shut all this ground down to that was suitable lynx habitat. And in 2013, we joined with the NTA and their lawyer, and we fought and we won that lawsuit. And so I was very confident in, we're probably in 2022, maybe, that this grizzly thing happened. And what they're saying is no private trapper has ever held a grizzly in a trap in Idaho, but the lawsuit was saying that it could potentially hold a grizzly. So we need to not trap when grizzlies aren't hibernating. And really, since everything came down to wolf trapping, all this wolf data, all this stuff in the lawsuit, we knew that, these preservationist groups, these anti-groups, they can't come after Idaho's wolf numbers because we're at 10 times the federal requirement. But what they could come after is they could come after this grizzly and say, and then the judge, in my opinion, very overreached, because he said, or she said, any units that has ever had a grizzly even in it or was old grizzly habitat. So you take like salmon, they've had the salmon region, they've had like 3 recorded grizzlies ever walk through there, or there's a lot of the Clearwater that doesn't have active grizzlies. And so that's where it closed all of the Panhandle, Clearwater, salmon, and upper snake regions, and closed it down to December 1st to the end of February. And so it was in our opinion, a massive overreach in that situation. And I don't want to go off in the weeds. You can get things like they call incidental take permit. Maine and Minnesota have been doing that with lynx, and says that if you're technically can catch X amount and still be able to pursue. But our argument was still, you have the most dangerous things to grizzly bears right now are highways and fly fishermen.
Wait, why fly fishermen?
Because they're protecting their own life up in Montana mostly. And so most of those grizzlies when they're protecting their own life, they're fly fishing and they're getting attacked. And our argument, not that we're against fly fishermen or driving in cars, but these other classifications aren't being persecuted. They're not saying, hey, we shouldn't fly fish during this period because you might have to defend yourself against a grizzly, or we're not shutting down any highways that are killing grizzlies. And then the thing that's scary about this sort of situation is grizzlies at least hibernate. You take other animals like a wolverine, and there's no way they are like roaming gypsies. I mean, they are any of the 5 Northwest states has had wolverines pass through there. And so this has lasting ramifications. So I think the long-term thing, that's why I stressed everybody that joining your state trapping organization and your national is so critical, because we spent tens of thousands of dollars fighting this lawsuit over the last 5 years. And fighting this, but the long-term thing is to get ESA reform. So right now we're paying someone $500 an hour to empty the bucket in the kitchen because the roof's leaking. We need to just fix the dang roof. And we're not saying that species shouldn't be recovered, but when it's used as a weapon to either, this is the new spotted owl of the West, where spotted owl shut down all those communities and all that just to protect the owl. And now they see that they're worse off now than they were before, but not to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, well, with the grizzly bear, lawsuit, like, obviously thanks for all you've been doing with both ITA, NTA, and all the other associations around kind of fighting that. And we'll give a plug now. And I think we do this on almost every show of, if you are, whether you're a new trapper, old trapper, wherever you stand on the trapping spectrum, if you're listening to this show, make sure you go and join your local association, your national association. It's very small dollar for the amount of benefit that you will get out of it as a trapper yourself. So that's one. And then the two is just, if not me, then who? And I think that's something that you've probably really taken to heart because you've been at the forefront, which leads to another question I had, which was, what came first with you, like the chicken or the egg, as far as like your true involvement with Idaho Trappers Association versus National Trappers Association? Or was that just kind of like an evolution where, as you worked and had the presidency with an ITA, that you just were more and more involved with other state associations and eventually National Trappers Association? And congratulations on, your election into the NTA presidency.
Yeah, no, good question. I think it just morphed. I never really, I wasn't like a little kid playing basketball. I'm like, I want to be in the NBA someday. I was interested as a kid in like the ITA meetings and stuff and board meetings, and then got on as a director, and then started getting more and more involved. And then when I saw some changes I wanted to make with our current president, I just started keeping track of those, and I just said, okay, this is, if I can get into the presidency, and I waited my time, got in the presidency, and I was just very, very aggressive as the presidency, and just worked my way up. And Idaho Trappers Association, it's the largest membership this side of the Mississippi now, and really put our name on the map nationwide. And then a good friend of mine, Matt Lumley, he was the vice president of National Trappers Association. He's up in Montana. He's a Montana president. And he's like, have you thought about throwing your name in the ring for the national? And I'm like, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. And I don't think people know who I am, but with social media now, social media can be drama-filled garbage mess of a lot of things. But if used properly for nonprofits, it can be a very valuable tool to get your message out. And I was very aggressive on social media, just saying, hey, this is what Idaho Trappers Association is doing. This is what we're doing. This is how we're working with other states. This is how we're working with other groups. And people noticed that. And then when I ran for general organizer of the National Trappers Association, and that's on their executive council, I beat a very someone that had been involved for decades in the NTA, and I was kind of surprised that there was that many people that, one, liked my message, and two, were maybe looking for something new. And so I don't know if that's because no one wanted to run against me, or no one else was stupid enough to take this position, but no one ran against me for this presidency. And so I'm in here now and trying to make some positive change.
So with that too, like, again, I want listeners here to kind of get a spiel from you too. Like, let's hop off of Idaho Trappers Association. Let's just assume it's going to be under the umbrella of NTA from the main pursuits. But as a president of this organization, like for the next however many years, like what are your main focus areas?
So one thing that I think that a big thing that I want to get the message out that people don't quite know, and I didn't really know until 5 years ago, is the NTA is not trying to be Big Brother. So if Idaho's got whatever going on in their legislature, whatever going on, they do not get involved in a state issue unless they're asked to. And so we have a plethora of expertise. We have our lawyer. And so if a state wants to, and we have affiliates in all 50 states, and they're kind of a paid affiliate, and they get one vote at our national convention. Each state does. But we don't get involved unless we're asked to come there. And it can be anything from having our lawyer, hey, we're having this issue on our board and we need your advice, to, hey, we're needing to rewrite some regulations on body grippers. We need some advice, to a full-blown intervention, intervening in a lawsuit. Like in Idaho, we didn't have the capital to, hey, we're going to have $100,000 lawsuit and have to get a lawyer that you can trust. The NTA has a lawyer that traps himself and is giving an extreme discount, and we could split the bill with the National Trappers Association. So they've had these, we can just swoop in when I've got a deal going on with Wisconsin or whatever. I'm like, hey, we're not reinventing the wheel. We've seen this before. But we're not there to play Big Brother if we're not asked to come. And then dealing with federal issues, there's federal stuff going on, and just trying to bring awareness and education across the U.S. So that's the main thing on the NTA. My main focus is the number of trappers in the U.S. The APHIS, American Fish and Wildlife Service, they just did their new survey, and in the last 4 years, trapper numbers have doubled in the U.S., over 400,000, and only 9,000 are part of their national organization. And so, really looking into this huge influx of trappers. And after COVID, the big thing was more backyard gardens, more homesteaders. Focus on like Amish kind of lifestyle. And then in the Southeast, huge thing is this nest raider craze with the price of raccoons going down. A lot of people wanting to trap the nest raiders for their turkey. Those guys in the Southeast are crazy about their turkeys.
Yeah, they are.
And so, and I want to really get in front of that new segment of trappers that are trapping. And I think we have a vast amount of, we can call them non-traditional trappers, that are in Chicago and they're having to trap coon and squirrels. And so I think we've been kind of stuck in the rut for a lot of years, and we need to adapt to this, to the 21st century. And so I want to start pushing social media more, and YouTube, and really get in front of these people and show what the National Trappers Association could do to represent them.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me because prior to my moving out to middle of nowhere Idaho, I came out to be a hunter and fell into trapping by meeting some old timers and them explaining to me that if I wanted to be a better hunter, there's more opportunity in trapping that you could be doing year round, especially in our state, to become a better hunter. And that's how I fell into it. But now that I've gone full bore and trapping has become kind of my main pastime, I guess, or recreation tool, like even this podcast, we're averaging 10,000 downloads every episode. That's 10,000 people across the U.S. that are listening to a little podcast about trapping. And it's amazing, like you said, the doubling of those interested and buying licenses and joining associations is growing, which is interesting because it flies in the face of what you see publicly, like what happened in New Mexico, the stuff that happened in Colorado this past year, all the stuff in Oregon and Washington on the cutbacks of trapping season. So I'm still struggling to kind of like have my brain fill those gaps between what we're seeing like on the ground as trappers and the associations with the growth. but then the public reflection of really like cut down seasons and trapping's bad, and it has no place in modern society. I don't know if you have a take on that, but I've struggled to figure out why that is.
Well, I think the and it's probably wrong to just keep calling them antis. This preservation groups are very, very active on social media. They've got a lot of money. And so they are carrying the message out there, and they're doing a better job at carrying the message out. And, I tell a lot of people, the 1%, and I truly believe it's 1%, the 1% of the population that's anti-trappers, I don't even try and convert them. I mean, that's like a flat earther. That's like I might as well tell you that, the sky is green. But there's 5% that are pro trapping, whether trappers or hunters or whatever. It's all that 95% that are fence setters. And that's where we really need to focus on. And those are the people that are just like, well, I guess I don't know. I mean, you teach me either way. And, I think that some trappers, they want to, if someone's not on their side, they want to shove it down their throat. And there's some people that, hey, we need to be very tactful and ethical and very mindful of those people that don't want to necessarily see it. Everybody that eats a steak doesn't necessarily want to see a cow butchered in front of them. And so they can still be pro trapping, but not have it rammed down their throat. And so I get really frustrated with some trappers just they're so closed minded. They're just like, oh, they just gotta have it shoved in their face. So they're not pro trapping. And, there's just a vast amount that I think we just need to get that message out to them. And they're not necessarily anti-trapping. They're just fence setters. And that's our voting public right there.
Yeah. And I think that's the large goal of this show too, is like to show the human side, which is where this is a less of a technical podcast on like, how do you do a dirt hole set, or how do you set up a great, beaver set? It's about the stories, because I think that's one thing that gets lost on people. I had a lady on, Rachel Doble from Montana, and she was on, and, she was dang near PETA vegetarian in high school. Yeah. And ultimately kind of came around with life experience that kind of brought her back from the edge. But the stories of people, I think, is what is being missed out on so much. Like every trapper I've met, whether they're grumpy or whether they're just most of them aren't like the most people persons in the world. Most of us like to be off in the woods, but all of them have awesome stories. All of them are most likely the person who's going to give you the shirt off their back and would help you in a pinch and show up when you need it most, even outside of trapping. And I think that's where I really wanted to start to elevate stuff through the show is these are great people. God, they're great people. But like the image that we have is, not necessarily always the best.
Yeah. I think that, my in-laws had not been around trapping at all. And I was just recently married a few years ago, and they have just completely embraced it. And at all our events, they're just like everyone, it's like a big family. And everyone's so nice, and wallets are thrown on the table, and the keys are in the car, and they cook food for all our events. And it's just all these people that we only see a couple times a year, and it's a big family gathering. And it's literally some people like tears form in their eyes when the event is over, because it's a big family. And now I'm seeing that with the National Trappers Association, just a great group of people that are out there, and trying to do what they love. And then these people in these associations that are volunteering hundreds of hours of their time, trying to protect this and educate and promote trapping. It is the greatest bunch of people in the world.
Yeah. Well, okay. So time always flies on the show. We're kind of starting to butt up against an hour. I want to make sure that I can do the quick hitter. I asked the same last 3 questions of every guest, so I want to do it with you too. First one, it's always a hard one, but what do you see, as the Idaho Trappers Association president, National Trappers Association president, as the future of trapping in the United States?
I see the future of trapping is and it does break my heart. I think there's still always going to be some fur side of things, but I think that it is going to morph more into the predator management side of things. And I'm still going to do as much as I can to promote fur and fur use, but I think it's going to be more domestic fur use and protecting predator management.
That's a fair answer. Now, my favorite question I get to ask everybody: lifetime of being in the woods, you've been trapping, forever. And what has been the wildest experience that you've ever had in the woods? Trapping or otherwise, just wildest experience ever in the woods.
I think if you're out there, one of the best things about trapping is you never know. You could get nothing that day. You could have two wolves. You could have a mountain lion. You could have a lot of things. But the things that just you're like, I can't believe this happened. No one's going to believe it if I'm not right there. Whether it's we literally on a 72-hour trap check, we were right there when a guy caught his dog. Like we heard him yelling at his dog. It was a ranch hand up in the woods. He was letting fence down his dog, and he's yelling at his dog. And my dad's like, "What?" He goes, "You idiot! What are you doing sniffing around there?" And literally, I don't know what the odds are of that too. Seeing seeing another fox, checking out the fox in a trap, and you pull up and it runs off, and you're like, "What are the chances to that?" To having a trap in the ground for 2.5 months and catching something on the last check when you're pulling traps. I mean, it's just so cool because you're out there in the woods and you never know what's going to happen from time to time. But those are probably just a couple that come to my mind. I could probably think of some more if I sat here long enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish we had more time to sit here, but given that, we'll kind of move on. But I always hit everybody with a hypothetical at the end. So last question. Would you rather get to be a true modern Jeremiah Johnson where you have no financial burdens on your plate and you can trap year round, no longer as the NTA or ITA president, you just get to do what you love? Or would you want to be able to, stick with everything as it is now, but reintroduce trapping education into every middle school curriculum nationwide?
Believe it or not, the second one for sure. I get a lot of enjoyment out of getting trapping in front of new people, and so I do love trapping and stuff. But I get a lot of enjoyment out of this presidency, and like in Idaho, in fourth grade they talk about Idaho history, and so we go to a lot of fourth grade classrooms and seeing all those kids, teaching them about trapping. Teaching them, let them feel the fur and stuff. And we just had a kids camp in Fairfield last weekend. And I thought, I was just like, okay, I mean, I've been a high school football coach and a Pee Wee football coach for a long time. I thought my kids are all grown now, would be like, whatever, kind of bored. Kids literally hugging me when they left and saying, this is the coolest thing I've ever had in my life. I'm going to go set my traps. And I mean, that if that doesn't warm your heart, then you just got a cold soul. I mean, it was just very cool to see touching these young kids where some of them haven't really got much outdoor experience. And so it was just very cool. So I'd say the second one.
Awesome. Well, Rusty, we're butting up right at the hour mark. So first and foremost, I want to thank you, not just for everything that you've been doing in the state and nationwide, for helping me when I first got into trapping as well. But is there anything you want to let people know, any plugs for both ITA, NTA, upcoming events, or anything like that before we close out?
I would just say, urge people to join the Idaho Trappers Association and the National Trappers Association for what you could go out to a dinner for. You're getting someone that's fighting for your trapping lights and promoting and protecting trapping. And I don't know how long until this airs, but September 5th, we take our fundraising banquet and we move it to a different place in the state every year just to get in front of new people. And so people feel represented all across our state. And so this year it's September 6th, 5th or 6th, whatever Saturday is, 6th, at the Fort Hall Casino over in Fort Hall. And so we've got all kids eat free under 18. We've got a kid's gun that's given away. There's going to give a lifetime hunting license away to a kid. We've got, 15 guns are going to give away, a lot of very cool auction items and games to play and dinner. And we're going to have speakers. And we've had the director of Fish and Game speak there for the last 5 years. And so it's a very, very cool event if you haven't been there, and we bounce it around to different places in the state. So urge people to look it up and join as members.
Perfect. Well, this will come out before then. So people listening, you have a chance to get down to Fort Hall. I can attest. I've been to them before. They are an absolute blast. My kids always have a great time too, and eating free. And I will say this. You mentioned that to get a membership is about the same cost of dinner. I don't know where you're eating, where for like 30 to 50 bucks, you can actually get a meal for a family. So you're actually getting away cheaper than what it costs for you to eat a meal by joining your associations. But with that, Rusty, thank you. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.
Thank you.